So now that we've covered all the fundamentals of making normal maps on those simple demo assets, let's take a look at this entire process that I mentioned earlier and create a small vehicle. Now, this is the end of the blockout, which I'll cover in a second. We'll talk through it as I create it. But this is going to be a small vehicle that follows a character around. So here we've got a box. It's about 2 meters high. And so we can see that this vehicle, drone, it hovers and it can fly alongside the character and act as a big pack mule that carries the character's inventory, backpacks, weapons, anything like that for this kind of idea of a game asset. Now, I created this for this tutorial with a few things in mind. So I wanted to make sure that we had lots of round stuff, like these cylinders, lots of different parts that overlap, a little bit bigger, and we could see it from all angles. So that was the criteria that I started with when I created this. That way we can kind of cover a vast variety of issues that would come up while making a game asset. So let's hop back over to Photoshop, take a look at the entire process again. So this is all the steps involved in making a game asset, and what I just had open in Maya was the blockout, the final blockout for this vehicle. And what I did before that was a ton of reference gather, and with that idea of those few things in mind for the criteria of making this vehicle for the video, I went and looked around and I generated ideas by looking at images, concept art, or anything like that. So, hopping on Pinterest and adding some search terms like pack mule or vehicle, drones, all kinds of things, and whittling that down into something that I felt fit the criteria a bit better, and generated some ideas for a final asset. So let's take a look at some of the reference gather that I put together at the end of this stage and talk about that. So this is my mood board that I created. It's a bunch of different images. Now, I've cropped out the sections that are interesting to me. So I don't have the entire image here. Some of these images are just, 5% of the overall image. It's just one tiny section, and I've scaled it down and put it on this page. Now this page is pretty big. I can zoom in pretty far and still have those details. So what it is it's a good place to kind of have one image open that I can scroll around and look at a bunch of different stuff and get ideas from. So if I'm stuck on a part of my model as I block it out, or I'm modeling the high poly, kind of take a look at this and see if there's something that sparks some interest and ideas for creating parts on this vehicle. So let's move on and hop back into Maya and take a look at the creation of the blockout for this vehicle, keeping in mind all of that criteria. So right away you'll see that I have my Maya window up and my reference off to the side. So this way I can see both things at the same time in one simple location, and I don't have to flip back and forth between things. I don't have to move things around. I don't have to open a Windows Explorer and flip through all my images to find ideas. I've collated this thing down just to a few images that are sparking ideas and giving me a general direction. So I'm going to focus on the big macro shapes first. I know I want this thing to be round. I know I want it to fly and hover. And I know I want it to be heavy duty and be able to carry things around in a rough environment. So with those criteria, that's a reference that I pulled up. You can see that I have like some kind of satellite image up there, a few like techie wall panels. I have some tank parts, and I have some kind of gadget down there at the bottom that has a lot of detail that I found interesting and thought I could use as a thruster. So I've got my cylinder set up. I started with the thrusters at the bottom, and I started out with 4 of them and didn't really like it. So Now I'm just going into thirds, thinking maybe this thing will look a little bit better or more interesting in thirds. So blocking out a triangle, finding out the corners, and giving myself something to snap to as I create these things to keep them lined up. So just doing that and still thinking about these broad shapes and getting things to line up correctly. And once I have some kind of template to use, I can snap things to this easily, scale them, and move them around, and always have it back where I need it to with that template. So I'll do that little triangle around and just snap things to it as I change my mind or move things around. So once I've got these thrusters kind of feeling like they're in the right spot from the bottom view and with a kind of good spacing around them, I'll move on to the next piece. So trying not to get too caught up with this stuff and force myself to continually move on and continue with that idea of I'm making a block out, I'm doing the big broad shapes, I'm going to go back into this thing and remodel it from scratch. Everything I'm doing right now is just temporary. It's all block out to prove out the idea, get it into the game engine and take a look at it and see and make sure these ideas are working before I spend too much time on them. So I've got the thrusters figured out. General idea, I like the thirds. I like how it's split up. I like that top right image of that satellite or whatever it is with the 3 wings. So I'm going to use that as a starting off point and see where I can get with that. So just adjusting my scale, figuring out how these flaps look and feel scaled around, what kind of rotation and spacing between all of them. And I'll continue working like this by blocking out sections, getting a general idea of something and moving on to the next piece. So I know that these wings could move, I could delete them, maybe they're not the right thing for this model and I won't want them, so I'll move them around or delete them. So and each piece and section will build off of the other for me and kind of grow things out until I have an overall block out. And once I have that overall block out, I'll start to go back in and tweak areas. You know, maybe the sides feel off and I'll change that, and then another part will feel off, and I'll just continue to kind of balance that back and forth until everything feels a little cohesive and fits together. So as you see, I took that cylinder, I extruded some of it in on the center, and then the wings didn't feel like they were in the right position anymore. So now I continue to move them around in object space, so I can rotate them and move them in and see where they should clip in and how they feel, and make sure they're lined up on that thirds. So with things all lined up there, I'm going to move on to the top here, and you can see the image that I have off to the bottom right. And what it is it's some kind of top lid to a tank that opens up. So I thought that would be pretty cool. It's kind of the one image that I found that was the jumping off point for all of this. I really liked it. I felt like when I was thinking about a drone, drones nowadays are super small and tiny and silent, and it didn't really fit that criteria of any of the stuff that I wanted for this project. So as I was looking around thinking tough things, I found the tanks, and that was one of the images that stood out, and I just thought it was really cool and thought I could make a neat top to a drone. So what I'm doing is blocking that stuff out, taking off each of the sections in its kind of big shapes and seeing where they fit and how I can structure them and make them fit in with the rest of this model. So I copied this one fairly close just because I do like it. It works and it fits all the right criteria. So I'm just modeling those big shapes again, getting them spaced out, see how they feel, doing it really simple and just clipping things into each other, extruding things, pushing points around and scaling until it kind of feels right. So there is a little bit of feel to this and what feels good to me. And I'm trying to tie it back in with the reference and fit it with that criteria. So as long as I do that, I know that I'll be on the right track going forward. So most of that top is figured out now. It's feeling good. It's feeling good with the rest of the model. But the wings are, the wings still feel, very, very boxy and very planar. So I'll have to go back and touch those again. But that top detail is starting to feel good, and add in all these little extra bits. And what I liked in some of these things were those kind of flat areas. So that we have this rounded off, top, but if you're going to put things on top of it, they'd slide down. So giving it some spots to, put packs or bags up there and have them, have stopping points or points for the weight to kind of settle and not slide off this thing. So continuing to think back, all right, what is the purpose of this thing? This thing is a pack mule. It's supposed to carry a bunch of gear around for the character, and it's supposed to be heavy duty. So when you see me do this I'm turning off the lights. So if you hit 7 on the keyboard, it turns on lighting, but if you don't have any lights in the scene, everything goes black. So this is a great way to kind of model and look at just your silhouette. So zooming around this thing, looking at my silhouette and getting that set up correctly. So it looked too flat and too thin on the top, and what I wanted, and once I added that back and raised it up a little bit, kind of started to push the whole thing forward and give it some directionality, like it's going to fly in that direction, and have that weight. So just pushing this stuff around with that silhouette again, continue to look at that silhouette, see how it feels, make sure, the wings aren't giving me trouble compared to the rest of the model. And because if I look at the wings on this thing right now, it feels off. It doesn't feel correct. But once I took those wings off and looked at just the silhouette, I felt like I was on the right track. So, now it's time to go back in and create those wings. So I duplicate that cylinder and to just use that as a starting off point to get some more angled circular wings to this thing that follow the form of the entire vehicle and continue on with that overall rounded shape. With that rounded shape, I'll figure it out. Again, going back to the idea of this thing's going to hold objects in inventory, and with it being rounded off and the wings being slanted down, I wanted something to catch all the gear and hold on to it. So I'm adding some support beams, and I'm not quite sure how they're going to fit or how they would kind of hold other props on top of it. So I'm just adding all 4 of them to all the sides, making it flat, model this thing out flat, and then copying it over and then moving it into position. And then once I've got it all into position, I can decide, do I want 3 of these bars? Do I want 1 bar? Do I want none of these bars? How does this thing feel? And I can continue to work with it that way. So I've added extra pieces, knowing that I'm going to go and delete some of them once I see how it feels. So angling these things down, getting their pivots points set up into those corners, and that way I can rotate them in object space, and all at the same time get things lined up correctly. So they look too big. I don't like the flat space. I like the rounded part with their connection, but the flat kind of end point didn't really feel correct and made things too long. So getting that set up, deciding that, hey, I don't really like all of these bars, they don't feel correct, and just continually going back and forth and iterating on this thing and seeing what feels right and what looks correct and what helps, push the eye towards the center of this thing and make it feel heavy duty, like it's flying around. So you see the wings are getting much smaller. They're going to grow, they're going to shrink until everything kind of feels correct and the positions are going to move. So that's why I don't want to get too detailed. I don't want to worry about where these things connect and how they connect and what they look like just quite yet. So that way I can move things around and not get stuck in some kind of point where I feel like I'm going to lose a bunch of work, or I'll lose the things that I did like before. So just keeping things broad and on that big macro scale right now. I'm reminding myself, hey, this is a block out. It is going to get deleted. I'm going to remodel this thing This is all about figuring out what this thing should look like and where these pieces fit together. And then I'll go and worry about all those connection points and make it precise later on.